All right, hello everyone. Welcome to a Friday episode of Crypto with English. So, for anybody who's in this space, you often hear the word DApp being thrown around, decentralized applications. And I'd like to introduce a guest today who is actually among the first, I would say, and in fact, actually one of the first major contacts I've ever made in this space, who has a practice in a company that specifically specializes in blockchain decentralized applications. Now, mind you, when I first came across Jesse and his company about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, this was not the industry norm by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, many companies did almost dabble with blockchain decentralized applications, but seldom you came across a company that targeted specifically specialized in blockchain decentralized applications. So I'd like to warmly introduce to you all an old friend, a former, I wouldn't say former, but a very passionate individual of blockchain, much like myself, Jesse Anglen, the co-founder and CEO of RapidInnovation.io. Jesse, thank you for coming on, and it's great seeing you again as well.
Dude, it's awesome seeing you again as well. Long time no talk. We should do this more often.
We absolutely should. And if you could tell everybody a little bit more about RapidInnovation.io and some of the things you were working on this year, because I can say this: I've had the pleasure of seeing you guys expand greatly over the past year, doing numerous things. But I don't want to take away too much. I'll let you talk a little bit more about your practice and some of the things you're up to.
Yeah. So the idea of rapid innovation kind of came about because I saw that there was basically what you had is you had a lot of like freelancers that were out doing blockchain work. Web3 development, I think, is what it would be called now, but DApp development or decentralized development or whatever you wanted to call it. And there was no company that was built around this idea of doing decentralized development. Like everyone kind of had it as an ad hoc add-on to
Right.
Web2 development, or they'd go, hire some freelancers on Upwork or some other freelancing platform, and they would add them to their team, and then they would say, yeah, we do blockchain development. And I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if there was a company that was built from the ground up that focused 100% on Web3 development, like all our entire focus just on building decentralized applications for people. And so that was the idea behind rapid innovation in the beginning, right? Was to provide a source for that, because really there wasn't anyone doing it. Now, when I say no one, Consensus did some, but Consensus was super focused on enterprise, right? They wanted to work with the Microsofts and they wanted to do more like permissioned enterprise solutions for large companies that wanted to implement blockchain in some way, shape, or form. The Boeings
Sure.
and Amazons and all, Microsofts of the world. And if somebody just like woke up one day, had some money, and was like, what, I think that decentralized lending sucks, and I think that if people did things a little bit differently, it would be way better. I want to go build an application that improves the user experience of people who want to do decentralized lending. There was no one for them to call. Like they had to figure it out on their own.
Right.
And so I saw a need in the market, and Rapid Innovation was built. Now it was kind of a slow start because it's been about 3 years now. There was 5 of us in the beginning. I think when I talked to you last, which was forever ago.
Yeah.
It was like a year and a half ago, maybe.
Right. Yeah. Just about.
Yeah, I think that I probably had about 45, maybe 50 people on the team at that point, and we're now sitting right at around 300. And so
Awesome.
we have grown a lot, mostly because there's a ton of demand and not a lot of people doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm having a blast. I mean, it's kind of interesting to have what I call the world's smallest monopoly.
Yeah, and I remember when we first had our conversation, you were working on, creating all these various MVP DApp projects for all these startups. So when I first connected with you, I thought that was actually very novel in all the good ways, because I think, like you said, I was vaguely familiar with Consensus and some of the little work that they were doing, within enterprise, size companies and in that space and whatnot. But, when I first heard that you were doing this specifically with startups, I was very bullish on what you were doing. I'm like, this is going to be the future. This is definitely going to work. And you know, and you look at the trajectory and I guess you could say the progress of things. So many startups, so many big things going on. There's something different
Yep.
coming out every single day. So I think that's absolutely incredible that you had the foresight and wisdom, and you can say faith in yourself to do that. I was actually going to ask you, when you first launched Rapid Innovation, did you have a lot of detractors, cynics, skeptics say, Jesse, you're nuts? Why are you gonna do this with this kind of business model? Like, I would imagine there
Yeah.
had to have been like a few people who were like, oh, I don't know about this.
I mean, it really depended on who I talked to, right? Because
Yeah.
there was two camps, right? There was the people that really believed that like decentralized ledger technology, blockchain, smart contracts, like that was the future.
Right.
Those guys were anyone I talked to that was kind of sitting in that arena, they were all super excited because there was
Right.
no one else that was 100% focused on really building blockchain applications, especially for entrepreneurs, which is, our goal is to like build MVPs, like get your first product out there. So you don't have to go hire a team, figure all this stuff out yourself. You've got someone that knows what they're doing to help you.
Right.
The people that I would say were my biggest critics were people that said that blockchain's never going to replace or never going to be a large enough market segment to replace like the big Web2 development shops. Like it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And what you're so focused down onto such a tiny little niche that you'll never have enough business to actually grow, which has proven to be absolutely not true. I mean,
Right.
we double in size about every 3 months, and because we've needed to. Maybe that's a bit of an over exaggeration, but we've grown a crazy amount. I mean, to go
Yeah.
from 35 people on the team to 300 people on the team in 12 months that's a lot of growth, and that's a lot of demand because all those people are busy. And so, and as we do more, there's a basically get one person who goes and puts an application out there that's successful, and they go tell their friends that Rapid Innovation helped them get it built. Then you get 5 more people that knock on the door and are interested in building something. And we try to make it as accessible to everybody. Like that was the goal in the beginning, was to make sure that that anyone could go and build an application. And doesn't matter how much experience you have. Like I've got clients that come in that have been in the blockchain space for as long as I have, 2000, 2011, 2010. And then I've got clients that got into it this bull run, 3 months ago, and they fell in love, and they see the potential, user experience upgrade to the world, and they want to get into it. They know nothing. And either person I can help, because all of the systems and infrastructure that are built around being able to help those people get an MVP out to the world. And as long as they understand the industry they're in, they don't have to understand the blockchain side of things, because we'll educate them and help them figure it out.
Right.
So,
and if we were to kind of, yes.
Yeah. No, so I love it. I get too excited actually when I talk about it sometimes. I have to be careful.
And if we could kind of go back in time a little bit, could you talk and maybe expand upon your programming background as well?
Oh yeah, that's a fun story. So, so traditionally speaking, I came from the real estate industry into the blockchain industry. So, I had a client that back in 2011 asked me if we could go out to coffee, and sat me down and said, "Hey, I want to sell all of my real estate investments, and I want to buy this thing called Bitcoin." I was like, dude, this is a terrible idea. And so I spent the next 2, maybe 3 hours trying to talk him out of it, because he was about to sell the world's best investment and buy a scam online that people used for, illicit activity and drugs. And I was like, dude, this is terrible. I didn't convince him. He did sell all of his real estate. He did buy Bitcoin, and then I eventually went to work for him, because that's how the world works. When you make a dumb decision and other people make good decisions, you have to go work for those people. So, several years later, right as Ethereum was launching, I went and started working for him. Now, the issue was I had very, very rudimentary development skills prior to that point. Like I had cheated on a couple of video games building bots, when I was in my, late teens, early 20s. I had,
That's pretty cool,
done some
actually. By the
basic,
way, do you
yeah.
would you mind telling me which video games were those?
So it was Dota and like that style game. What was the other one? So there's a couple of Android games that had like
Oh
PHP backends
yeah,
that I went, and I think one was called like iMobsters, and I would actually go in and hack the
yes.
backend because I found out that there was latency between the different requests, and so I
Oh
could go and like
wow.
hack the backend and become like a crazy superstar. Dude, it
Yeah, and
was
I
it
played
was
that game too. That's pretty cool.
you played iMobsters?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, so I always loved automation, and I liked building processes and systems to make things easier. And so my programming started there. I was never super great at it. And so then when my friend asked me to come on board and help him, I asked, well, like doing what? Like I'm a real estate guy. He said, well, I want you to hire, train, and manage Web3 developers, or decentralized blockchain developers. And I was like, dude,
yeah.
this is a terrible idea. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. He said, man, YouTube. He's like, well, so he told me two things that convinced me to do it. He said, number one, he said, Ethereum hasn't even launched mainnet yet. No one knows what they're doing. He said, there's no one on, Gavin knows what he's doing, and the guys that work over there, but nobody else does.
Right.
And so you're not behind the curve. You just know exactly as much as everyone else. So now's the time to do it. And he said, and number two, you can learn anything you want to on YouTube. And so I'll pay you and take 3 months and learn how to program. And I was like, okay, well, I guess if
Wow.
it's that easy, I'm going to go do it.
Yeah.
And so I did, and I became the world's worst programmer, probably. But what I did do is I learned enough to be able to identify developers that were extremely good, and I could tell whether or not they were writing good code. I could read what they were writing. I could understand. I could help them, create the logic behind stuff if they didn't understand the decentralized nature of what they were writing, or
Right.
or how stuff worked. And so I wouldn't say I really became a great developer, and I am by far one of the worst developers at Rapid Innovation today. But I did identify how to hire amazing people, which is how I ran across Prasanjit, who's my co-founder, one of
Yeah.
the most brilliant Web3 developers on planet Earth, in my opinion, at least in the top, 10, top 20. And then basically said, hey, listen, like you're way better at this than me. Let me go do the stuff I'm good at, which is, the business development and the marketing and the sales stuff.
Yeah.
And you focus on all the technical stuff, and we're going to build an awesome company together. And I think that was a good move, because he has built an amazing team of developers that back up all of everything I say that we can do.
And with your background and kind of the way this all progressed, what are some of the things you look for when hiring and considering developers for your team?
It depends on when I'm looking for them. Like, so back
Okay. Yeah.
in the early days, there weren't any Web3 developers. I mean, there was, you figure, on planet Earth, there just weren't very many. And so a lot of what we did in the early days was we would go to different tech colleges around the world, and we would find the guys that were in the top 1% that were being recruited by Google and by Facebook, Adobe, the big
Right.
enterprise tech companies. And we would intercept their recruitment and say, hey,
Nice.
have you ever thought about blockchain? And a lot of them knew about blockchain, knew that it was going to be a significant part of the web development world, or the development world in the future, but didn't know how to get into it. And
Right.
so we gave them an opportunity to come on board and said, hey, we'll train you. And so a big part early on was just developing a training protocol, training mechanism to get people from being, that were fresh out of school, very, very intelligent, very smart, into being really high quality, good, fast Web3 developers. And I've actually found that to be easier, because they don't have a lot of centralized experience that clouds the way that they
Oh,
think about
right.
things. Because when you're building stuff in the traditional world, there are certain ways that you go about doing it. There's best practices and just ways you go about thinking, like how you logically think through problems is very, very different than when you're actually developing smart contracts. And
Yeah.
so when you train someone from the very beginning to really think that way, they're able to intuitively solve problems and be creative in ways that Web2 developers, even with a lot of experience, and actually sometimes better than Web2 developers with a lot of experience. And so we started that way. Nowadays, you can find people who actually have experience, building blockchain applications. We hire those people when we run across them. We still recruit and train and hire people. Um, if we find, brilliant people that are coming out of school that want to do stuff. And then we also actually take and reform Web2 developers. And so, if someone comes in with a lot of backend node experience, you can pretty easily flip them to Solidity, as long as you can help them understand that the mindset needs to be very, very different when you're thinking about a decentralized architecture versus a centralized architecture.
Right. And can you talk a little bit about that mindset as well? And I think you're in a better position to, articulate that. I do have some experience uh, programming, coding smart contracts, Solidity, and the EVM. But this is purely in a like a certification academic sense. I have no real, you could say tangible professional experience. So my first foray is decentralized, but I don't really have any context for centralized. So if you can kind of expand upon the mindsets, actually, that'd be perfect.
Dude, that's funny because you and I are actually very similar. Because my first serious attempt in the development world was learning decentralized architecture, decentralized application.
Yeah.
I actually started learning Solidity before I really knew JavaScript, which I didn't realize
Oh
that was
wow.
backwards. But
Yeah, I
uh,
actually learned some Solidity first before anything else,
yeah,
actually.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I
So
have
I
a
think you and
context
I,
of yeah.
yeah, you and I probably have a relatively similar experience there. But I mean, if you think about just very, very simple concepts, right? Like if you're building in the Web2 world and you've got an application, you need to keep track of users. Um, and so you're going to have a process where users come and they sign up and they give you their information. You store that information. You create a token for them so that you can keep them logged in on your application, or whatever your architecture happens to be. But it's this mindset that you're going to bring people, you're going to onboard them. When you flip that, just a very simple flip to a decentralized application where you aren't going to know who your users are, because all they have to do is log in with their MetaMask, like they log in with their public private key pair, and now they're utilizing your application. They may never be back. They may continue to use your application, but there is no onboarding. Like everyone who is in the Web3 space who has access to it, they can sign a public key with their private key, is a user, whether they've never been to your site or not, whether they've never used your application or not, right? Like everyone is a user. And so even like those tiny shifts in thinking um, are mind-boggling to people. Stuff like,
Right.
we don't need a password recovery. It's like, well, because I'll get people in there like, yeah, I'm going to build this application, and they'll build in, password recovery. They're going to build in all this different stuff, build in accounts. You're like, no, 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 you don't need any of that, and they can't wrap their minds around why. And it's like, because everyone's already logged in all the time. And they're like, well, but they've never even been to our application. It's like, well, they don't need to come here. Because the first time you come, you log in with MetaMask, you're a user. If you leave
Right.
and never come back, that's fine. It doesn't matter. And so it's just that mindset between, like, how do you shift someone's brain into thinking about things in a decentralized way where you're not collecting data from people. It's more that you are providing a window into the blockchain that allows people to interact with different smart contracts, and your job is to make the best UX, because anybody else can come and interact with the same smart contracts. They're
Right.
decentralized. Anybody else can come in and create a user experience for people, like create another perspective or another window in. And you look at things like it becomes really obvious when you see things like swaps, right? You'll have
Oh yeah.
5 or 6 different swaps that are built, and you can go really to any swap and use it. and people migrate to the ones that have the best features and the best user experience, and so it's more of a user experience game. It's more of a how you go about making sure that when people show up, it's sticky and going to keep people there than it is about how you onboard people and how you build, this architecture to, trap people on your site.
Right.
Um, and so I would say just like simple stuff like that is hard for people to wrap their mind around. The other thing is if a Web2 developer is building a backend and they screw something up and they push it to production, then they change it, right? Production goes down
Right.
for a little bit,
Yes.
they go back in, they modify it, they change it. When you've got a guy on the blockchain team that pushes code to production, i.e., deploys it on mainnet, and they have a problem, like you have a problem, like this is a big problem. And so getting people from that mindset that, oh, this will be fine to just push out, like it's probably going to work, to the mindset of we have to be 110% sure that there is absolutely nothing wrong with this,
Right.
and we have to have thought through all the scenarios. What happens if there's a bajillion people using it? What happens if people, like, the amount of thought that needs to go into something where you have immutable code that can't be changed once deployed?
Yes.
Shifting people into that mindset is, number one, dangerous, because you get someone in who doesn't really take that seriously, they can lose a
Right.
client a lot of money. um, and number two, you get somebody in who doesn't take that seriously, and you end up creating a really, really bad experience for anybody who's actually utilizing that developer to build stuff. That's why Web 2 developers make like terrible Web 3 developers, until they kind of get that, until it clicks, right? Until they
Makes sense.
realize
Yeah.
what's going on.
Wow, I think I think you've conceptualized that, quite nicely. And I remember, and I first started, learning, through YouTube videos and, certifications. I think one of the baseline, almost kind of like principles and rules, is that everybody's kind of disconnected but kind of connected at the same time. So everybody's a node. Everybody's kind of like their own server and database, all in one. So, as a starting point, I guess you could almost say that seemed normal. And by the way, this is
Mhm.
just within the scope of my limited experience. But I guess, coming from Web 2, that has to be like a big, almost, that has to be a big mental jump to kind
Yep.
of recalibrate yourself, into that direction, into that mindset, into that kind of framework, so to say.
Yeah, and some people pick it up really, really fast. Like they just get it. They come almost pre-programmed because their mind really understands it. And some people struggle, which, that's why I love training people. You get them from the very, very beginning,
Yeah.
and they grow up with this mindset. It, I love it, because some of the very best Web3 developers I have didn't have any experience 3 years ago when I brought them on board, and
Wow.
they're now, in my opinion, like, world-class Web3 developers that really understand this stuff on a on a fundamental level, like other people just don't seem to be able to. Love it.
Yeah. And I have to say, I find what you do and your skill set particularly special, because you're a programmer, you're a CEO, you're a co-founder of this company, but you also enjoy the experience and process of training people into this, Web3, blockchain decentralized universe. How do you train people? Like, are there some sort of like kind of guiding principles that you use? Because I've seldom come across that the programmer CEO that also likes to train and onboard people to learn this. I think that's great.
Some of the secret sauce there is I don't do the training. I leave it up to people who are more qualified than me. I knew that I wanted training to be a big part of what Rapid Innovation did, and I actually want it to be a bigger part of what we do in the future. Um, we've had conversations about actually creating like Web3 school for people that really want a top-notch education in the Web3 world,
Yeah.
and we bring them through, and the whole entire focus is to, more than a certification, like more than you now understand how to do, Solidity development or Rust development on chain, or C++ or whatever, but like a actual education where you have a fundamental. When you leave, you have a very, very in-depth understanding of what it looks like to be a developer, and all in the blockchain world and across the board, because there's shifts that have to happen from the perspective of front end developers, as well, or back end developers that are interacting with blockchain. If you've got like a hybrid model where there's blockchain and back end and front end, like all of those people need to really understand blockchain super well. And so I've just hired amazing people that are really good at putting that stuff together. And our training is more like, thinking that back in the olden days, when you'd have a blacksmith who was really good at being a blacksmith, and he'd
Right.
take somebody in under his wing
Yeah, an
and
apprentice, and
and apprentice them. That is more the style of our training as it stands right now, because it's
that's
incredibly
excellent.
effective. Um, but at some point, I want to set up more of a traditional school that then brings people out of that into more of an apprenticeship, so that there's not as big of a burden on the senior developers that we have,
Yeah.
um, because they don't have to teach the basics. So there's a lot of improvement that we can have as a company there, and we'll see what happens over the next couple of years. But I'd like to be the world's leading blockchain, leading organization that creates more blockchain developers than anybody else on planet Earth, that are actually high quality, almost
Yeah.
like trade school rather than, traditional education.
Yeah, and I really do like that approach. And I will say, with with my experience, it's mostly in certification and testing. I think what's limited there is that you're really preparing for the test alone, so to say, because a, you want to pass it, but also b, just because the way I think the material is fed to you, this is for like, okay, this is what you're going to have to do to, I guess you could say, resolve this problem, scenario, or to answer this question, correctly and whatnot. You're not really being oriented or geared to say, okay, you've been essentially given a project, go figure it out. So
Yep.
I think the apprentice, you could say, strategy or mindset, I think that's in many ways infinitely more useful. This is your hammer, this is the cauldron, this is the
Yes.
mold, like actually, like, pouring the molten metal into it, like that's actually, I think, the type of hands-on experience people really need, so to say. I
Yep.
think, don't get me wrong, certifications are great, but to actually, let's say, be blacksmithing, you really have to be doing it almost day in, day out,
Yep.
and really mastering those fundamentals first.
Yeah.
If
Well, and
anything.
then the test ends up being whether or not you screw it up or not, right?
Right.
Like there is, and there's a lot at stake. When
Right.
if you are, if you're the guy who's going to be writing a smart contract, it's the first one you're really going to be developing on your own,
Right.
and you know that this is going to be, pushed live on a mainnet, real money, and it better
Right.
function exactly like it's a function, or someone could get absolutely screwed over. You go and push that, right? We have an internal auditing team. I don't let anybody push anything live to mainnet until they've gone through it. So you push that like you're pushing it to mainnet, it goes to the auditing team, and they say, hey, you've got this massive problem with the contract that you wrote. If we push this out,
Right.
that, or even something really simple like there's no withdraw function. So, congratulations, you've created a one-way money trap where people can send USDC, and sure, a token gets minted, but there's no way to pull that USDC back out of the contract because you forgot to add a function for it.
Right.
Then all of a sudden it sets in, right? You failed your test, but it had real world consequences because you were
Right.
writing that for a client. Now, do our clients have to feel that? No, which is great. I don't ever want clients to have to feel that, but the
True.
developer gets to feel it,
Yeah.
when it fails. And I love that because that is what the test really is, right? It's not some exam that some teacher's
Right.
giving you on paper somewhere
Exactly.
that means nothing to anybody. The real test is when you get out into the real world, are you going to perform well? Are
Right.
you going to make garbage that doesn't work? Or
Right.
are you going to build, beautiful, long lasting, bulletproof code that lives on chain forever and have clients that are happy? And at the end of the day, you've aced it if you can accomplish the second. I don't really care if you can give me the right answers if you can't do the
Right.
second. So
Very well
I
said.
love I love the model. I think it works well.
Yeah, and what's a better test than, you could say, real money on the line, real expectations on the line, and, you could say real world consequences on the line, like the comparison you made of, let's say if somebody pushed something through and ends up being a one-way money trap. And by the way, I like that term to say the least. But yeah, like there's, I mean, where's the true reset button on that? You can't kind of
Yeah.
unring the bell in many ways.
No. No, and that's what one of the things that's a mindset shift that people have to have when they get into Web3 development is that like once you push it to mainnet and people are using it, there are no do-overs. Like,
Yeah.
and if you've done your job right, let's say you screwed something up and you've got money locked in a contract somewhere, or something went haywire, and you can fix it, that meant you screwed up anyways, because you shouldn't be able to fix a screw up. It should be immutable. That means you're hacking your own contract. And so if you do it right,
Very good points. Yeah.
you should be screwed if you mess something up. And this is one of the things that I love about Web3 development is that the level of excellence that you need in a Web3 developer that's working on your application, it has
Yeah.
to be just incredible. Now, this is not across all chains, right? Because there are some chains that are not immutable. Like EOS was one of the chains that we
Right.
worked on
Yeah. If you
early
want
on,
to,
right?
yeah, if you can
You can
actually
modify
expand on
code.
that a little bit more, the
Yep.
immutable chains versus the ones that are not.
Yeah, well, and there's also like there's some stuff that's really interesting. Like early on in the Ethereum world, we actually built an architecture for smart contracts that actually allowed for the upgrade of smart contracts in an architecture. So it, in a sense, made things mutable. Now you have to be careful with that, right? Because part of the trustless nature of smart contracts is that they are immutable. But you can build certain a certain kind of architecture that actually allows you to, like, let's say you've got a router contract, right? And that
Right.
router contract is looking for logic in other contracts. And as a inside that router contract, you've got a method that allows you to update where it's finding its logic. And it's going to be finding it from another smart contract. And so what you can do is you deploy that router contract, and then you deploy a series of contracts around it that have logic in them, and basically all of the functions and methods that you need in order to run your application. And if you ever need to upgrade a piece of functionality, you deploy another smart contract, and then you go back to that router contract and you point it to that other contract, right? In essence, you
Right.
have upgraded your application. And so there are ways to do architecture even in a completely immutable environment that actually gives you some level of flexibility.
Yeah.
Um, but when you do that, uh, you have to do it in such a way that you aren't also destroying the the trust that comes with an immutable contract, because there's a certain amount
Yes.
of trust that comes with a contract that can't be changed. And if you build an architecture by hacking the system and create an architect, create a series of smart contracts that can be modified, all of a sudden you lose that. And so you have to be very careful when and when you don't do it, how you go about doing it. You can have that router contract governed by a DAO, or different things along those lines, so that it becomes, you're basically adding centralization in and then decentralizing it again with another layer, where you've got a DAO on top that allows for the modification of something. It gets really, really fun. Like, you can do all kinds of super, super interesting things. And then if you really want to, you can go work with something like EOS, where you can just modify your code,
Right.
and you've got a history of everything. But if you ever want to go and make a modification, you just do it. I think it's more fun personally,
Right.
to work on stuff where once you push it, like, it is what it is. Hopefully you didn't screw it up, because there's a certain level of adrenaline, right, on that launch date when you go,
Right.
you're ready for that mainnet launch, and you push it mainnet and you watch it work, and the
Oh,
community
yeah.
starts interacting, and it's an adrenaline rush. I mean, it's fun.
Yeah, and I like something you said, and I think this was kind of articulated in, let's say, other materials that I had to use. But like, hacking your own smart contract to like kind of mitigate or correct the mistake, it still means you screwed up. And in fact, like in
Yes.
not so many words, that's also kind of how I felt when I had to, I guess you could say, do these training modules where you have to create your own smart contract and stuff like that. That theme was kind of communicated not as well as you said it, but there wasn't the sense of like, okay, I'm gonna go deploy this, but if things go wrong, I'm just gonna reel it back and try to toggle around with it. There was this sense of permanence, eh,
Yeah.
when you did stuff. And like I said, starting off from kind of that point, in blockchain, I had a hard time imagining otherwise, actually. So I
Yep.
kept like checking and double checking. I'm gonna go eat lunch first and then come back to this later, and
Yep.
type of
Yeah,
thing.
dude, there's that moment when you push something to mainnet is a fun moment. It's an
Yeah,
adrenaline rush. It's a fun moment. One of the things like I have, like I think of it kind of like concrete that dries instantly when you push a little red button, right? So you go get all your
yeah,
concrete set out where you want it, and you're like, this is going to work. Like I can build an application on these smart contracts, and then you push a button and it's over. Like it's now hard.
yeah.
You don't go in and move stuff around. You don't change it at that point. If you were wrong, you're wrong. And
Right.
if you can modify it in order to make it work, you were still wrong
Yes.
because you shouldn't be able to.
Right, right. Yeah, absolutely. I think I think you've explained this very eloquently, to say the very least. And I like the breakdown of all this. Kind of going back to rapid innovation, and when you guys started picking up momentum. And by the way, just as an outsider, I really started seeing rapid innovation really making a lot more headlines, probably almost like the middle to late of last year. I just, obviously I know you, but like I just see all these things coming up in my inbox all the time, and various news feeds. I'm like, holy shit, Jesse's really on it. All right. So, what was the point that you knew, like, okay, this business is taking off. This is going to work. Was it like a certain client that you got at that point? Was it a certain project that was launched successfully? Was there some sort of like sign, so to say? I'm like, okay, we
Did-
we are
I,
really doing something big here.
I think really what it was when so I've just had my head down working, right? Like
Yeah.
the goal is growth, the goal is quality, the goal is to take care of people. Like I've just had my head down working. And this February is the moment that I realized something had happened when I was at ETH Denver, having a
Nice.
conversation with like some of the guys at Consensus and like some of the bigger players in the space. And they asked me like, "What do you do?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I run Rapid Innovation, and we've got some developers, and we're kind of a dev shop for hire." They're like, "Oh, how many people do you have?" And I'm like, "Oh, 300, 250, I think at the time." They're
Yeah.
like, "Are you serious?" I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, there is nobody else in the world that has that many developers that are actually working for other people, and it struck me that as far as I could tell, and I think this is still true. I'm sure that there's someone that'll prove me wrong if they watch this, which would be great. I'd like to know where I actually sit on the scale. But I don't think there's another company in the world right now that has as many developers as I have that are working only on blockchain development. Like there's a lot of, I like to tell people I believe I'm the largest Web3 development company in the world that focuses on building Web3 applications for other people, and I only have 300 people. You look at the largest software development company in the world, and I'm so tiny you can't even see me on the scale, right? Because there's some that have 800,000 people that are on their payroll, and I've got 300,
Yeah, but you're
which just
fast,
proves,
efficient, and specialized. I mean,
yeah,
you guys are like King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, or Achilles and the Myrmidons. Like small group, and
yeah,
they just kick everybody else's asses.
yeah. I mean, I hope so. Well, and the idea is I'm just going to keep growing it because there just aren't a lot of people doing what I'm doing, which I still don't understand why. Because I
And
felt
as your
like I
friend, I'll
was
even
late to
say
the
too,
party.
I'm like, why are more people trying to copy you at this point? I was actually thinking about
Seriously,
that. I'm like,
I know. Why
what's
don't
going
you?
on here?
You're as good as me. Like we should compete against each other. I mean, a little healthy competition goes a long
Right.
ways, right? Because at
Sportsmanship.
least
Yeah,
then
it's
I've
kind of
got
nice
clients
actually to
that,
kind of have like a
yeah, it is.
rival kind of.
Exactly. I could tell people that like, oh yeah, we're way better than English. He doesn't know what he's doing. He sucks. You could say the same
Hey,
thing,
don't
and we
tell
can like
everybody
have a
that.
little healthy banter.
It's just a
But
rumor.
what's interesting is there just aren't a lot of people that are like it seems like there's a lot of people very interested in the small boutique, where
Yeah.
they've got their 15 developers and they go build one application at a time. And for me, like, and maybe this is where this is coming from, because I am I am incredibly passionate about one thing. It took me a while to find it, but I'm incredibly passionate about one thing. I want to make an impact on the world using technology. Like I love technology, and I love watching things grow. Um, And so when I like the reason I decided to go the route of providing a service to this industry was because I could help more people grow things, right? If I was just building a product myself, I could do one thing and maybe I'd make more money. I'm pretty smart. I might come up with something awesome and make a lot of money. But then what? Like I have made a tiny little impact and a lot of money. I'd rather make a huge impact because that's what I'm most passionate about.
Yeah.
And so like for me, I'm just thinking like, why aren't there more why aren't there more people that want to help more people innovate? Like I would love competition, not even because like I mean if somebody would come into the space and do way better than rapid innovation and just like shove us into bankruptcy, I still get what I want. Because what I want to do, I want to see the space move forward. And that means someone
And you're
has
changing
beat
it,
me,
despite the result.
right?
Like you're changing it. You're
Yeah,
orienting people in your direction in many
exactly.
ways. Yeah.
Exactly. And like we see the leveling of the playing field that blockchain brings. We see this inefficiency that exists like everywhere that is mind-boggling. I mean, staggering amounts of money wasted on a daily basis due to third-party inefficiency. We see some of that start to decrease. Like we're utilizing this technology to actually make the world a better place, to upgrade people's user experience in life. Like to me, I'm just wildly passionate about that.
Yeah.
And I don't know why there aren't more people doing it. I think you should. I would love that. I can just imagine it right now. Like decentralized applications with English. It has like a ring to it, right? And then you hire some people, you compete with me. It'd be great. We should do it.
I mean, I'd much rather partner up with you, to
Oh,
say
okay.
the very least. But no, I totally understand that because I think to an extent, I think if you look at the history of technology and companies and things from the .com boom and beyond that, a certain level of rivalry makes you better. It makes you more competitive. It makes you hungrier. So to say as well. Like there is kind of a way, like with that friction, people kind of just get better. From that over time as well. And what I'd say to anybody is with Jesse here talking about making the world a better place and reaching out and trying to encourage people, he's absolutely true. And I'm going to throw this little anecdote out there. So as I mentioned, Jesse, you were one of the first people I networked in this space. So throughout 2020, I was really just studying, getting certifications, just trying to learn as much as I could. No contacts, no connections whatsoever. So I'm literally this guy who came from law, jumped off of that, green as hell, just wanted to learn about blockchain. At the beginning of 2021, I'm like, okay, I have my LinkedIn account. Let me just try to network and just reach out to random people who are, doing things that are interesting. So I reached out to a bunch of people. You were one of the few that got back to me. And I think we had a phone call in early February. So some of the
Yep.
things that we were talking about today, very true, very consistent. And you are literally, living by what you say, to say, the very least. And a lot of these things you discussed today, these were also some of the things you mentioned when we were, on the phone call as well about changing the world and being specialized and kind of focusing on one thing.
Yep.
Web3, blockchain, and going forward with that. And I will say, like, since that time in various roles, consulting or being a co-founder and whatnot, I've encountered companies where let's say they're from a web 2 universe and they provide all of these services, so to say. I find a situation where a lot of them are trying to go on to web 3 or trying to open up kind of like a practice within a practice of web 3. But with some of those parties I've had to like deal with and negotiate with, there wasn't as much of a sense of clarity as far as the overall, you could say almost the macro look of things and how it's going to play out, and also kind of offering services that aren't exactly needed, so to say. And I came across that a lot. So when I spoke with you, essentially creating a practice in a company dedicated to solely Web3, I think that's what people are going to want. This is exactly what I want. Not more, not less. Just surgical, to the point. It is what it is type of
Yep.
thing.
Then I've got sometimes it's a problem and sometimes it helps me a great deal, but I have a obsession with one iron in the fire. Like I see these people that are like, hey, I want to do all of these things. I've got so many
Yeah.
clients that come in that are like,
Yes.
yeah, so like, I'm like, so what's your UVP? What's your USP? Like, what is the thing that makes you unique, that where everyone's going to use you? And they're like, oh, it's these 14 things. I'm like, no, no, no. Like, that is not how you are successful. Like, people are successful by doing one thing really well and then adding other things to it,
Absolutely.
right? Amazon, they did one thing very, very well. They sold books. That's all they did.
Right.
Nothing else. They
Yeah.
sold books, and they
Everything
sold
else kind
books
of came.
online better than everyone else. Now Amazon sells things online better than everyone else, and that's because they started by selling books better than everyone else online. And like, for me, like, I want to provide that first initial push into market. Like, I want to get clients to a place efficiently, cost effective,
Yeah.
thinking about the future. I want to get people to a place where they actually can go find their product market fit. They can make their modifications.
Right.
They can adjust with what people want, and that's the one thing I want to do well for people. Will I add other stuff? Yes, but right now, like, having that singular focus, I think is one of the reasons that we've been successful. Because dude, I look at it like this. Life is like you're driving from Seattle to New York, right? You have a goal in mind. I want to get to New York. That's your singular focus.
Right.
Well, you're going to hop on I-90 and you're going to start heading east. And there's going to be 10,000 billboards telling you that if you get off at this exit, your life will be better than if you make it to New York. So many people do that,
That's
right? And they
yeah,
never
yeah.
get to where they want to go. And I'm the kind of guy who's like, you need to go to the
That
bathroom?
is
Like, don't
yeah.
care. Like, find an empty bottle. Like, we're going to New York. Like, that is where we're going. And the only time I'm ever going to stop along the way is if I need to refill with gas, or I need to do, if I absolutely have to have something, I will
Right.
stop, I will get it, and then I will get back on the way to New York. And I think that level of focus is what it takes to be an entrepreneur that actually is successful. Because when people are constantly getting off and going and doing other things, like, oh, maybe this exit will get me what I want and I don't have to go to New York, they get distracted, and somebody else is on their way to New York. And one day
Yeah.
they wake up, right? And that other company is there in New York, and they're like, man, I was going to New York. I had that idea first. It's like, no one cares if you had the idea first. It's whoever gets there first that actually
Very well
wins. And
said.
you don't get there unless you have a singular focus. Now, if your focus is pointed in the wrong direction, you can kind of get in trouble, and that's where it
Right.
becomes a little yin yang. But
Yeah.
if you believe in what you're doing and you know where you're going, you can experience a tremendous amount of success. And that's not me. That's every single successful company that you see anywhere.
Right.
That's what they did. And
Right.
so I'm just trying to follow the greats of the past. I'm not trying to do anything new. And I don't even
Yeah.
tell any of my clients to do something new. It's like, hey, just do what everyone else did to be successful. You'll probably be fine.
That is, I'll have to say, that is beautifully said, and I really like that analogy of, I-90 and essentially all the stops saying, hey, listen, if you make this detour here, your life will change. It is such an easy trap to fall into. I think as an individual, as in groups, because I think maybe it's just as humans we're always looking for answers, or we're looking for like the next logical step. And I think the point is that I think that's where you kind of start compromising, maybe without knowing it. You think you're going in the right direction, but instead, you're kind of almost working against yourself, over time.
Yep. Yeah, you take the shortcuts.
Yeah.
Like, hey, if you stop here, you'll get everything you ever wanted in life. And people pull off the road, and then they hang out there for 6 months and realize it's not what they wanted, and they have to get back on the freeway. And everyone else is just a little bit closer than you now because you
Yeah.
weren't focused. Now, sometimes you get off the freeway and it works. And I think that's why people do it, is because there's these companies that exist, very few of them, but there are companies that exist that have
Yeah.
taken shortcuts and were overnight successes, and everyone wants to be that.
Right.
But that is the exception to the rule, and
Very much
it's
so.
never a good idea to try to be the exception. Now, if you find yourself the exception to the rule as you're on your way towards your goals, like, be very thankful, because not a lot of people get to experience that. But
Right.
you're much more likely to succeed if you know what you want, and you are focused on getting it, and you don't get distracted.
By the way, that is also very well said too. In many ways, kind of following the same steps and almost the same processes as you could say other, greater companies or brands prior to, I guess, whatever you're doing. There is kind of a consistent formula,
Yeah.
to say the least. And I think this, as far as being the exception, I think a lot of people do go out there perhaps with the intent to be the exception. But I think almost you need to have some sort of logical feedback as you're in this process. Some part has to be showing some sort of some sort of completion, some sort of forward momentum if you're going to
Yeah.
kind of be going this exception route, because otherwise you might just be driving yourself into the ground
Yep.
unnecessarily.
Yeah, and usually people are chasing money. I mean, one of the things I've realized is that there are two kinds of entrepreneurs, almost without exception. Maybe a third, but basically two. I get people who call me up that say, I want to do something in blockchain. When I ask them why, they use a lot of words, but they basically say, I think I can make a lot of money.
Oh, okay.
So that's person number one. And then there's the other kind of entrepreneur I work with, where when I ask them why, they once again use a lot of words, but they say, I want to change the world, and I think this will make people's lives better. And as a byproduct of doing that, I think I'll make a lot of money.
Right.
And it's the people that focus on the clients that sit in that number two camp that actually do really well, because the problem with chasing money is that every billboard on the way from Seattle to New York promises if you get off the freeway, you'll make money. And so
Right.
you have 1,000 stops on the way to chase this thing that you really want. Whereas if you know what you want to make the world a better place. And, to use the analogy, New York, if you get there, you're making the world a better place. It doesn't matter how many people promise you money along the way, because that's not your goal. It's not your
Right.
focus. You know that when you get to New York and you make the world a better place, you will make money. And so people, if and it's like clockwork. It's not 100%, but it's as close to
Right.
100% as you can get. People who try to make money in the space and that is their end goal, they fail. They just do. It's too distracting. It's so hard to do. But people who are trying to change the world, oftentimes, now the success rate for entrepreneurs is very low,
Right.
but those people are the ones that win. Not all of them, but a lot of them, and a lot higher percentage than the people who are trying to make money.
Right.
And so I always encourage people, like, make sure you understand what you're doing, where you're going, and why you're doing it, and the money will come.
That is a very good way of putting it. I wanted to ask you about that. So, do you think the reason why, let's say, Camp 1 tends to fail way more often, and Camp 2, despite maybe being a harder route, tends to, in the long run, succeed more often? Do you think there is more discipline that's required to be in Camp 2 than in Camp 1? It seems like in Camp 1, I think if you're just chasing money, there's just, I don't know if there's just way more temptation or just ego, along the way as well. And I think almost in Camp 2, you kind of have to be an idealist. You kind of almost have to be a
Yeah.
bit more pure in your
Yes.
quest,
You
to
have
get
to be
there.
passionate, right?
Yeah,
Everyone's passionate about making money. There's very few
yeah,
people on planet Earth that if you're like, hey, I have this way that you can make a lot of money, and they believed you, they wouldn't do it. Like
yeah,
there's not very many of those people in the world.
right,
And like, here's a really practical example of what I actually see happen. And this is like, this happens a lot. So you've got a company that's building an application, and they're at that MVP stage where they have their one feature that they think is going to be attractive, right? And they believe that they're going to find their target market fit with this one
right,
feature that's going to change the world. Their sales guys and their marketing guys start going out there, and they get a hold of some eccentric billionaire in Brazil, and he says, oh, if you I understand what you guys are trying to do, but if you were
right,
doing this other thing, I would be on board. And so then the sales guy goes back to the guy who's driving, right, with this billboard that says, hey, this guy who's an eccentric billionaire in Brazil said that if we do this other thing that we're not doing, then he would be on board. And so then that guy calls me up and says, hey, we just ran across this guy. This is this awesome opportunity. We want you to change everything that you guys have done in the last 3
right.
months in order to accommodate this one person in Brazil who's going to absolutely change the world for us. What they mean is he's going to pay him a lot of money. And so then we do. And it
Yeah,
doesn't work, right? The guy in Brazil, he's like, yeah, I mean, I maybe not. Like, I'm not that interested in it. And so then the
right.
sales guys go out there and they do it again, right? And they find some other guy somewhere else this cycle just continues around and around and around. And before you know it, you've rebuilt the application 37 times. You've spent $1 million doing it. You have no more money left, and nobody cares because you have just gone in circles around and around. Whereas
Yeah,
if whoever's leading that project looks at that eccentric billionaire and says, well, obviously, if you don't know what we're selling, you're not the guy you're not our target market. Like, we're going to go see
right,
if we have a target market. And they go and they actually find out if there are people interested in their unique value proposition. And then they find those people, and those people come on board. and then those people have feature requests, and they're
Yeah.
continuing to build towards that end goal instead of just changing the destination, mid route over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And not to say that you shouldn't, like if you know the story of Twitch, right? Like they had built a streaming platform, and if I remember right, they're like they have this massive problem, right? Because they have this platform that is made for for vloggers to go and like vlog about their lives, and there's
Yeah.
all of these pesky gamers that are hacking their system to
Right.
make it work with games, right?
Oh, I remember now.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and so they're sitting in a boardroom going, how do we figure out how to get these stupid gamers off the platform? Like they are breaking it. I mean, they're not using it how it's supposed to be used. Like this is like a pestilence over the system. And then one guy's like, wait a minute, there are only users. And they're like, oh yeah,
Oh,
I mean
yeah.
that's
That's
true.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, like why don't we say, like, since there's a lot of people who want this modification, like why don't we adjust? Like, and
Yeah.
that I think is an example of like a wise decision to move a direction that isn't
Yes.
really about money, right? They now somewhere in the back of their minds are going, hey, if we focus on these people, we'll probably be able to make a lot of money. But what they saw was they saw a group of users that really wanted what they had with a few modifications. Then make those modifications. Like that is a course
Right.
correction that everyone needs to make.
Right.
But don't do it for some eccentric billionaire in Brazil who says he's going to make you rich. Like that is
Right.
not the time to shift direction. That's just a billboard promising you something that you'll never get.
Yeah, one of the things I pulled from this, I guess being able to distinguish between a course correction and a compromise, and I think Twitch, is now reminding me of that story. That's a very good example of that, so to say. This
Yeah.
was something that I think was very much needed, but also very much met a genuine demand. But I think for the most part in sync with I think the overall goal of Twitch. I mean, listen, I use Twitch as well. You go on Twitch any given day, what's being bombarded to you through your browser? Live streams of various video games and computer games and stuff like that. That's almost all you see when you jump on, at least for me anyway. So, and by the way, I'm even thankful enough I've even gotten a few followers for this show on there. I don't put any gaming stuff on there, but sometimes people on on Twitch actually do view this. So, but yes, it is overwhelmingly a gaming-centered type of media
Yeah.
live streaming
Well,
type platform.
the thing I think is funny is that the meeting they had set up was to figure out how to get rid of the gamers. That's what I think is funny, right? They're like, what
Yeah.
can we do to get these people off the platform? They're ruining our platform. What they didn't realize is that they were the platform. They just,
Yeah,
they
right.
just didn't know exactly where they were going. So you got to look for stuff like that. But if you are focused on providing value, upgrading the user experience of people's lives, you'll see that. Like that's why they saw it. Maybe not
Right.
everybody, but the people that mattered saw that they could upgrade the user experience of these gamers that had no place to go and show people what they did, and no real community, and like there was no home for them. It's like somebody saw that, and their
Right.
focus wasn't on making money, it was on upgrading the user experience of these people's lives, right? And so
Right.
if you keep that in the forefront of your mind, it just absolutely changes everything.
Yeah.
And those are the people that succeed. All of my clients that have succeeded are people that are trying to make the world a better place in whatever their little domain is. And
Yes.
and all the people that have failed are people who will show up and try to make money. Not 100%, but very close.
Right. And back to the example you made of, let's say, eccentric Brazilian billionaire who wants to essentially just make money and I guess otherwise expand his or her portfolio of investments. Being, let's say, in your situation, how does one override the temptation to kind of say no to those opportunities? Because I think even sometimes, let's say even if it's from an eccentric billionaire, they essentially may mask something that's just purely money motivated with almost like a nice veneer of an idea. Like, I feel like sometimes even some of those might not even be entirely black and white. Like, how do you kind of center yourself to be like, okay, we should really pass on this. Great in the short run, probably terrible in the long run. Like, how does one, I guess you could say, come to their senses in that scenario?
I think it goes back to what you said earlier. Discipline, number one. Like you have to be going somewhere. I mean,
Right.
If you've ever, like the difference between me hopping in a car and driving to New York and me hopping in a car and going for a drive, those are very different, right? If I hop in a car
Right.
and go for a drive, my goal is to see things that are interesting and stop and like explore the world.
Right.
And so if I see something that is interesting, I will, I'll stop. But if I'm going somewhere, like you just need to be going somewhere. What is the like? You can't get derailed. Uh, well, you can get derailed, I guess, but you're not going to get derailed if you are actually going somewhere. Like a train that's
Right.
not moving goes nowhere. Like if you don't have a destination in mind, like you're not going to get there.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how long you walk or how long you run. If you don't know where you're going, like you'll just never arrive. And
Right.
so, number one, know where you're going. And then if somebody offers you something, you should seriously consider. So, like, let's say eccentric billionaires, like, hey, listen, like you were doing, you were planning on doing real estate, let's say with your idea, and I actually want to do like carbon sequestering and carbon credits, and I think you
Yeah.
could utilize the technology you've created to do that because that would be a very realistic thing, right? And I've got
Right.
billions of dollars, and I'm in this carbon sequestering industry, and I think that you could use your technology to do that. You need to realize he is suggesting that instead of going to New York, you're going to Miami, and you need to think to yourself, like, do I want to go to Miami instead of New York? Because if I do, that's where I need to go now.
Right.
um, and if you don't, you need to tell them no. If you do,
Right.
then you need to change directions. You're no longer going to New York. You are now going to Miami. You are no longer
Right.
doing real estate. You are now doing carbon sequestering.
Right.
And so I think it's as simple as that. Like just know, like have a destination in mind, be willing to switch it if it makes sense.
Yeah.
And don't be willing to switch it if it doesn't. And then continue to move that direction until you get there.
Right. Right. Very, wonderfully said. To say the very least, and also to be able to, recognize that as well. What a course correction is, what's a compromise, and the comparison of, let's say, driving from Seattle to New York versus just kind of going for a little like a night ride in your car, and you're just kind of like just driving around to see some interesting things. And I think stressing what you said, having a very concrete destination in mind, that is probably one of the most important things to do, because I think maybe it's just because of the excitement of the space and so many things are go on. I think it's good to be open, but I think if you're a little too open, that's a little bit distracting, and you're really just going
Yeah.
to be pulled in other people's directions instead of kind of
Yep.
controlling the steering wheel yourself,
Yeah.
so to
Well,
say.
it's discipline and passion, right? Like if you're really
Yeah.
passionate about going somewhere, accomplishing something, it's going to take a lot to persuade you to do something else,
Right.
I mean, it just is. Like if I desperately want to go eat at, a certain restaurant, like that's the only thing I'm feeling like eating, and I go call a friend up and it's like, hey, you want to go here? They're like, no, I'd rather go somewhere else. Like if that's the only place I want to eat, I'm going to fight him on it,
Right. Yeah. Sure.
and it's going to take a lot of persuading for him to change my mind.
Right.
And it's not to say that you shouldn't allow people to persuade you. You shouldn't listen. Like I think tunnel vision is also very dangerous. That's
Yeah.
why so many entrepreneurs fail. Like I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs over the course of my career in a lot of different capacities, but in a lot of it building software. And they like I mean, I think the industry says it's like 10% or actually succeed in some capacity,
Yeah.
90%
Some very
fail.
low number. Yeah.
That's been my experience. I've watched significantly more people fail than succeed. And you can like I've watched people with tunnel vision fail. They didn't see an opportunity that landed in their lap, like Twitch almost did. I've
Right.
watched people get so distracted they never got to where they were going. I've watched people do every single amount. I've watched people fail to get to build what they wanted to build and to change the world or make
Yeah.
money or whatever their end goal was in more ways than I mean, it's amazing how many detours there are on this road. Uh,
Yeah.
but it always boils down to a couple of very simple principles. Like they get distracted, they fail. Not always. Oftentimes they run out of money. There's a lot of things that'll happen if you get distracted. They
Right.
don't listen to their users, they fail.
Right.
There's a lot of reasons for that. Like you might not believe that your users know what's best. You might think that like you're building the product for yourself And so when 1,000 people tell you your product sucks, you're like, no, it doesn't. Like, I use it every day. It can't suck. It's like, well,
Right.
I mean, you can also be wrong. So
Yeah,
you
you
can be
might have a few
arrogant,
blind
not have,
spots, you know?
yeah,
Yeah.
not have the humility to do stuff. Like,
Right.
there's so many different ways for the actual failure to manifest itself. But it's pretty simple. Like a lack of planning, lack of focus, lack of discipline, lack of listening, lack of empathy. Like there's a few qualities that an entrepreneur really really needs in order to be successful that I've noticed. Now I'm not a coach. I'm not a professional person. I've just watched a lot of people drive their car off the cliff,
Right.
uh, and I've watched a few people succeed. And they're like the people that succeed. There's a pattern there. The people that fail, there's a pattern there.
Right.
And one day maybe I'll write a book about it because I'll have enough experience watching people drive their cars off the cliff that I can
Please let me
help
know.
people
I'll
not do
definitely
it.
buy it.
Yeah.
It's good to actually collect and understand these stories, actually. And it's also good. I mean, listen, it's always good to learn lessons, but if you can kind of learn those lessons outside of yourself through other people's experience, it's a less painful way to go.
Yep. Yes, absolutely. No, it would be awesome. Maybe that'd be a good book, right? Like a collection of short stories of
Yeah.
just like I go back and I write down, change the names, places, ideas, all that stuff, but just write down
Right.
the journey of all these different clients that I've had, like 200 short stories on clients that either succeeded or did not, so that you can actually learn from people's failures.
Right.
I should take a vote. Your audience should let me know if I should write that book.
Yeah,
Not that I have
absolutely.
no idea. See, and here's where I have that choice, right? That's a billboard on the road to where I'm going. Do I want to actually get off the road and write a book?
Right.
I'm probably not going to. At least not right now. Like I need to get
Right.
to New York first, and then once I get to New York, I'll go back and we'll go try it.
And we've gone full circle in all the right ways just there. Yeah, that's also a very good point. I was going to say too, with everything going on with rapid, innovation. This is the last question. Are you and your team going to be appearing at any of the major conferences, panels, and other, I guess you could say, Web3 events for the remainder of the year?
I keep getting invited and keep getting asked. It's an area where I think you see kind of the failures that I have in my focus because I see that stuff as a distraction sometimes.
Sure.
It's like, gosh, it takes time to
Travel and
get
prepare and
there and prepare and all that stuff. And then you can't sound like a fool when you're there. So you probably ought to actually think about what you're talking about. And then like in all of that time that's being wasted, like I'm not moving the direction that I want to be moving. And
sure.
so when really in reality, if I stop and think about it, it does help where I'm going, right? Because exposure gets more people in the door, so more success that this space has, which is what I want.
Right.
So I will probably be doing more of it. I mean, that's why I started doing, like podcasts with people
Yeah.
and talking to them, because I think that this gets rapid innovation a little bit of exposure, and hopefully we can help more entrepreneurs build more stuff and change this industry. So
Yeah.
I will end up doing more of it. My PR person is going to make me at some point. So,
Good stuff.
and my marketing guy and everyone else on the team that is trying to pressure me into going and doing things. So it'll happen.
Yeah, keep me posted on that. I know you and your team are doing some great things. I think it speaks for itself. If you look at social media, you look at the news, rapid innovation. You guys are certainly carving out a path and carving out your name. Um, Truly, in this space as well. And like I said, being one of the first people I met, and you also generously offering your time to speak to somebody as green as I when I first started out. I really do appreciate that, and I wholeheartedly celebrate all the success and the continued success, going forward. So, Jesse, I just wanted to say thank you very much for coming on the show today. Awesome reconnecting again after like a little over a year and a half, and it's really good to get into the weeds about all this.
Absolutely, and we should do this again.
Absolutely.
I do a lot of podcasts. I have to be careful because some of them have been really great. But I enjoy your style. This is my thing. This is my jam, right? A
Thank you.
conversation that starts and just goes somewhere and
Yeah.
ends. Beautiful. You can't really get better than that.
Thank you, Jesse. I really do appreciate that. And yes, listen, when the time is right for you, with what you're doing in your schedule, I'd love to have you come back on and pick up from here, and then talk a lot more about rapid innovation and where it's going to be going next, and how you guys are really pioneering this space, to say the
Heck
least. And
yeah.
who knows? Maybe you'll have some rivals that come up, during that time too. Maybe somebody watches this
Yeah.
episode or something else. I think a certain level of that competition rivalry, makes people better over time. So
Absolutely. Yeah, daps with English. I can see it right now.
oh, I wouldn't do that. No, I would definitely want to partner up with you for sure. I really like.
Heck yeah.
I really like what you're. I really like what you're doing. You could. I think. Doing this with this kind of business model, and especially staying true to it, inevitably, you're going to be there at the right time when there is true mass adoption, happening in society. Because I'm not in your shoes, but I would imagine there's been suggestions or offers like, okay, well, we're doing pure blockchain Web3. Maybe we should expand this to ancillary services that are a little unrelated.
Sure.
And I think that may be tempting as far as a short-term, monetary opportunity. But I think, like you said, those could easily just become major detours, and you might not, get to where you're ultimately, supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about staying on the path. Eventually, if you stay on the path, you will get there. Doesn't matter how
Yeah.
long the walk is. And it's one of my unique skill sets is being obscenely single focused.
Got
To
it.
the consternation of a lot of people on the team.
Got it. Yeah, and by the way,
Anyways.
if at some point this year, if you make it to New York City or kind of the metro area around here, give me a shout. Definitely want to link up and show you some of the great eats and fun things to do around here as well.
Dude, would love to do that. I almost was at NFT or NYC NFT or whatever it is, but I sent somebody else. If that was the case, we could have done it live. That would have been great.
Oh
In the
yeah,
same
right,
room,
right in
would've been
right
fun.
in Times Square. But don't worry, there's going to be a lot of other opportunities as well. And to be honest, like I kind of at various points rather be in your neck of the woods out there. You're still in your Coeur d'Alene, right?
Yeah, dude, I love it over here. I'd never
Oh,
live
it's
anywhere
beautiful.
else.
It's beautiful out there.
Most beautiful place in the U.S. Up for debate. If anyone disagrees with me, you can tell me. But it's amazing over here.
Yeah.
So,
well, I'll
anyways, man, it was
Yeah.
great chatting with you. I got to take off.
Yeah, likewise.
Would love to do this again. So just let me know.
Absolutely. We'll talk soon.
Yep. Take it
Right.
easy.
Take care, Jesse.